Welcome to the Chosen Ones. Every adversary crafts their own finale to the tragedy, which they never comprehend until the curtain falls. The Chosen Ones lean in, for what I'm going to tell is not theory. It is fact. History repeatedly demonstrates that when an oppressor goes too far, their downfall is inevitable. Think about it. Empires crumbled, not when they were vulnerable, but when they believed they were untouchable. At its peak, the Roman Empire thought it could expand indefinitely until its own excess dragged it down. That is the pattern, and it has not altered. Your foes felt they were brilliant and indestructible. Let's be honest. They believed they had you figured out like a cheap riddle on the back of a cereal box. But here's the issue. When arrogance meets obsession, calamity is inevitable. They did not just cross the line. They paused, danced on it, and then feigned surprise as the earth broke way under them. And do you know what makes the whole tale darkly funny? They believed taking that additional step would ultimately break you. Instead, it broke them, like someone playing a joke but sliding on their own banana peel. The irony is delightful. However, the lesson is everlasting. When your adversaries go too far, they don't just fail. They collapse in a manner that reveals all they sought to conceal. Stay with me, because what occurred here is not just poetic justice. It is a heavenly equation. Every achievement breeds its own failure. And who are your enemies? They just sign their own demise in strong ink. Number 1, they confused endurance with permission. They misinterpreted your perseverance for consent. That's when their demise started. When someone mixes patience with weakness, they experience a deadly kind of blindness. They saw you enduring blow after blow, smear after smear, betrayal after betrayal. And instead of recognizing you were born with a special kind of strength, they assumed you were too helpless or naive to fight back. The fact is that you were not enabling their actions. You were enduring it, carrying and storing it quietly, because you understood that not every struggle is worth a reply. Humans like pushing themselves to their limits. Give a person 1 inch, and their avarice leads them to assume they've been given an extra mile. Your adversary did just that. They saw your perseverance as a green signal, as if your silence implied approval. They overlooked the reality that your perseverance was not a gateway for them. It served as a protective barrier for you. When you didn't respond, they felt you lacked the bravery to. But in truth, you were just waiting for the appropriate moment, when the truth will stand on its own, when their own overreach sounded louder than anything you said. Endurance does not imply agreement. It does not imply capitulation. It implies you recognize that pain has a lifetime and cruelty has a timetable. The longer they worked at it, the closer they came to revealing their own hand. When they pushed too far, they discovered that what they believed was your vulnerability was really your weapon. Because their deeds are now undeniable. They violated so many boundaries that no justification, spin, or manipulation can hide it longer. The irony heightens the brutality of the situation. The patients they derided were the same ones who helped build your case. By enduring, you allow them to continue building evidence against themselves while waiting. You let them walk themselves into their own demise. You didn't need to capture them. They caught themselves. That is the terrible mistake they made. They misinterpreted your quiet for submission, your patience for inactivity, and your perseverance for approval. But, in the end, you were not the one who was caught by that error. It was them. Because every unnecessary step is now clearly visible. And the collapse they thought they'd planned for you has backfired on them. Second, they grew hooked to their own malice. They didn't simply mistreat you once and go on. They developed an addiction to their own malice. It may have started as a test, a little stab to see whether they could get away with it. But when they watched you suffer and understood they could injure you without obvious repercussions, it gave them a strange high. Cruelty became their drug. Each act of treachery or sabotage provided a thrill. And, like any junkie, they continued returning for more, intensifying it each time. The issue with addiction is that it rewires your brain. They no longer considered you a human person. They viewed you as a solution, an outlet, and a selected target to satisfy their need for control and power. Here's the unpleasant reality. Addiction always wants more. The first dosage is seldom sufficient. What began as little falsehoods grew into larger ones. What started as subtle disrespect escalated into explicit assaults. They were unable to quit because hatred had become their source of nourishment. But here is when their downward spiral led to their demise. Every addiction has a cost, and they had their own steadiness. The more they harmed you, the less aware they were of the repercussions. Addiction impairs consciousness. They did not notice. They were digging their own grave with every effort to shatter you. They had no idea that the joy they experienced from seeing you suffer was also a noose tightening around their own neck. Malice is inherently self-destructive. It corrodes the person who carries it long before it kills the target. They believed they were devouring you, but it was really consuming them. The bitterness, the plotting, those restless nights. I'm trying to discover new methods to tear you down. It depleted their spirit, harmed their relationships, and altered their perspective of reality. In their attempt to wreck your life, they damaged their own. And here's where the plot twists. They assumed it was strength. The capacity to strike without regret was a weakness. Because only the weak get hooked to brutality. Only the broken need another person's misery to feel alive. They overdosed on their own venom, and by the time they knew it, the collapse was complete. Their desire to hurt you became the same chain that held them down. Number 3, their brutality extended to self-incrimination. Their brutality turned into self-incrimination, and it was the tipping moment they didn't see coming. Initially, their strikes were deliberate, delicate, and concealed behind shadows. They believed they were sophisticated enough to keep their hands clean while making you appear like the issue. However, when they pushed too far, they lost control over their own approach. They made blunders because they were driven by a desire to excel. They started to leave fingerprints all over their plans. As they got increasingly determined to discredit you, it became clear that they were the genuine aggressors. This is the irony of hubris. It blinds individuals. They were so confident in their abilities that they forgot consequences existed. They believed they could extend their lives indefinitely without the thread ever breaking. However, if someone continues to tug on the cloth, it will finally unravel. Every overblown tale, distorted narrative, and unjustified assault. They all began linking back to the same source. Them. What they intended to use as weapons turned out to be receipts. When a liar refuses to stop talking, the truth does not need a defense. They exposed themselves by attempting to establish you were guilty of crimes you never committed. They faltered because passion often leads to excess. Their rage became so intense, and their jealousy so powerful, that they stopped caring about hiding their traces. That's why their downfall was inevitable. They weren't just assaulting you anymore. They were testifying against themselves. And this is what makes it even more cruel. You didn't need to reveal them. They revealed themselves. You didn't need retaliation since the case was constructed on their overconfidence. Every unnecessary movement, every needless stride, was like another piece of evidence placed against them. They believed they were undermining you, but they were really creating a tale about their own wrongdoing in plain sight. This is how enemies collapse. Not often from the punches you give them, but from the blows they unknowingly inflict themselves. They tried to demonstrate your frailty, but all they ended up doing was showing their guilt by crossing the line. They provided clear evidence of who they genuinely were. Their failure was not the product of your revenge. It was caused by their own irresponsible self-incrimination. Fourth, they activated laws that they did not write. They activated laws that they did not write. And that's when everything fell apart for them. People who thrive on deception often assume they can outperform any system. They are experts in twisting man-made laws, bending policy, exploiting loopholes, and using influence to avoid responsibility. For a time, it works. They get away with activities that should have exposed them, which reinforces their sense of control. But they forget that man-made rules are not the ultimate authority. There are deeper, older, unbreakable rules woven into reality, cosmic principles that no amount of manipulation can alter. When they went too far, they violated these laws. Laws of fairness, reciprocity, and balance that do not include rank, riches, or relationships. These laws are unbiased. They do not succumb to smart arguments. They don't recognize bogus authority. They only react to the truth, action, and purpose. When your attackers breached specific borders, they triggered a never-ending chain of events. It was not a courtroom, a committee or system that they might influence. It was the cosmos itself that passed judgment. What makes this so startling is that they had no idea what they were going into. They assumed they were still playing the same game of power, pulling the same strings. However, this time, their deeds took them to a level where their regular strategies were ineffective. It's like attempting to bribe gravity. It does not work. You tumble regardless. And this is why their demise seems so poetic. They took delight in knowing every trick, loophole, and backdoor to evade retribution. They went too far, however, and ended themselves in a region with no loopholes. The rules they established were absolute, unshakable, and unavoidable. The more they battled to resist, the more serious the repercussions became. This is the unspoken thread of hubris. It blinds people to the fact that certain laws do not need to be put on paper to exist. They are inscribed in the fundamental fabric of existence. When your adversaries passed that line, they didn't just lose control of the fight against you. They lost control over their destiny. Because once the cosmic scale has tipped, there is no lawyer, friend, or strategy that can turn it back in their favor. They fail not because you requested it, but because the cosmos upholds the law. They believed they could outrun number 5. They looked into a mirror. Their preoccupation with defeating you reduced their universe to a single dull cycle. You will discover flaw attack repetition in that narrowing as you study. They were so busy staring at you that they neglected to look at themselves. Attention is a tool that is deliberately employed to clarify, compulsively. It distorts. They teach their eyes to track your movements, identify your vulnerabilities, and create patterns where none previously existed. With that type of desire, they neglected the most important reflection as they sought for your defects. Everything they learned about you began to reflect back on them. The more they attempted to weave a tale about your guilt, the more visible their stitching were. Their reports, rumors, and strategically planned leaks started to bear fingerprints. The same tone, half-truths, and petty emphasis. People stopped looking simply at the subject of their allegations and began to see the accuser behind the curtain. The evidence they meant to plant turned into a mirror, revealing their own motivations. Envy, anxiety, and insecurity. Ambition, obsession. In the beginning, their comments were reasonable, but severe enough to raise suspicion. Over time, that sharpness evolved into something cruel and monotonous. That repetition resulted in patterns that anybody paying attention might recognize. These patterns conveyed character as much as technique. Their campaigns no longer resembled efforts to uncover the truth. They seemed to be efforts to hide the facts about who was behind the assaults. When attention becomes obsession, every action is a confession. The folks around them saw the malice underlying the compassion. Allies who had formerly nodded started to squint. Neutral onlookers who had previously looked away began connecting dots. Their attempts to expose you took energy, imagination, and deception. Energy needed to come from someplace. It stemmed from their experiences, connections, reputation, sleep, and believability. They put their soul into demolishing someone else when they were so obsessed with you, and, in the process, exposed the hollowness inside them. What makes this dangerous for them is how visible it gets over time. A mirror does not lie. Their obsession created the content that was reflected back. Motives, techniques, and contradictions. The harm they intended to inflict on you turned into a gradual public exposure of who they were. Their effort to construct your ruin ended up broadcasting their own destruction. Instead, the gaze they put out would return to them with crystal clarity, making their fall not just feasible, but unavoidable. Number 6. Their scheme needed a god they did not believe in. Their scheme needed a god they did not believe in. That was the last flaw in their strategy. They devised techniques based on control, secrecy, persuasion, and the belief that human systems could be programmed to deliver the desired result. Their intentions were mechanical. Manipulate the appropriate individuals, silence the right witnesses, and influence results with money or favors. Those instruments function within human frames, but when they went beyond ordinary brutality, they entered a realm where human techniques had no place. That zone responds to something far older and more demanding than policy or public relations because it refuses to accept the source. They have never studied the rules that govern it. They thought that force and plotting would suffice, so they never considered the repercussions of operating at a different frequency. What they put in motion required a counterforce beyond litigation and rumors, an alignment of truth, timing, and moral weight that beyond their expectations. Their strategies believed that the battlefield was a room filled with bargains and signatures. Instead, the battlefield turned out to be a larger ledger in which intentions, not just acts, were recorded. Their calculations neglected the basic truth that when someone goes too far, forces unconnected to human law react in ways that destabilize plans from within. They never defended themselves against that justice because they did not believe in it. They were fantastic at hiding tracks throughout the day, only to be astonished when dusk exposed what they had covered. Their denial also indicated a lack of humility. People who reject any higher standard for themselves become irresponsible since nothing holds them accountable but societal consequences. So they escalated. Louder lives, tougher assaults, and riskier gambits, until their actions required a reaction that human countermeasures could not provide. They anticipated stillness, uncertainty, and submission. Instead, they triggered alignments that revealed every lie and intensified every mistake. Their weapons designed for human battlefields just did not operate in that larger justice. The terrible thing is that they were unprepared when the answer arrived. They attempted to negotiate with powers they rejected. They negotiated with facts they refused to accept. That hubris stripped them bare. Their whole campaign was based on a confidence in their own superiority and the irrelevance of everything else, since they never believed in the source. They never followed its laws, and they have never respected it. They couldn't stop it from pushing back. Their downfall was not a surprise, but rather the foreseeable outcome of a scheme devised without the humility to acknowledge boundaries beyond human intellect. Number 7. They risked with time that they didn't have. They gambled with time that they did not possess. That risk is what brought down their empire. They operated as if deadlines were suggestions and penalties were on backorder, and every erroneous action might be postponed until tomorrow. In truth, time is the most stringent accounting of all, unforgiving, precise, and impervious to excuses. Your adversary saw it as a renewable resource and paid for his hubris with a swift, irrevocable countdown. Every slander, clandestine tactic, and postponed responsibility was recorded in a growing ledger. They felt they could outrun the consequences by moving quicker and putting more energy into their projects. Speed became their tactic, but speed without direction is like burning gasoline. They wasted seconds they'd never get back, devising new angles, enlisting new partners, and seeding fresh falsehoods, figuring there'd always be another hour to hide the tracks. Mistakes that may have been corrected in a controlled campaign were deadly when sewn together in haste. Worse, time uncovers patterns that concealment cannot conceal indefinitely. The more someone acts in bad faith, the more evidence they leave. A single fabricator may lie once and perhaps persist. Repeat that over months or years, and coherence will fall down. Stories contradict alibis, fray, supporters fade away, and time exacerbates inconsistency and reduces the safe areas for deceit. Your enemy's actions, repeated and prolonged, became a slow-motion confession. What seemed to be control in the near term evolved into exposure in the long run. They also bet on the length of their effect. It takes time to establish a reputation. It has accumulated. They spent theirs as if it were an unlimited credit line. Trust is eroded with each new assault. Allies allowed some uncertainty, then a little more. Then, one by one, they stopped tolerating everything. Doors that had been opened to them started to shut, not because of a single occurrence, but because of a time-based accumulation. Finally, there is a brutal mathematics to overreach. Each additional step they made cost them a corresponding amount of time. The very activities intended to assure their success decreased the time frame in which that victory may occur. The clock did not stop when they wanted it to. It ran out when the countdown reached 0. There were no appeals, rollbacks, or emergency extensions. Their desperation became their epitaph, and the time they thought they had became the last thing they wasted. Number 8. Their malice clashed with their death. Their malice clashed with their death, and the crash shattered the illusions they had erected about themselves. For so long, they pretended to be invulnerable. Like their plans, their power and control elevated them above the consequences. They played God with your life, selecting when to hurt you, when to isolate you, and how to alter your tale. In their own imaginations, they became destiny builders, devising scripts in which you were destined to lose while they won. But no matter how high they rose in hubris, they could not escape the truth that they were still subject to the limitations of human frailty. Mortality has a way of humbling us, even the most obstinate. As their wickedness intensified, they started to test their own emotional, physical, and spiritual limitations. Rage consumes the body, jealousy poisons the mind, and obsession depletes energy. Their plots were not only assaults on you. They were doing gradual violence on themselves. Sleep stole away. Relationships deteriorated. Peace of mind vanished. Their malice needed energy that their bodies could not provide. The hate they used against you was corroding them from inside. There's a deeper reality here. Pretending to be God needs endurance, which only God has. Mortality assures that no person can bear the weight of judgment, punishment, or dominance indefinitely without breaking down. They may have strutted with confidence, but their veins still carried blood, their bones grew old, and their hearts pounded toward an untimely end. Power and illusions always seem compelling until they meet the reality of deterioration and restriction. When mortality set in, their confidence started to erode. Every sickness, failure, and moment of weakness demonstrated that they were not who they claimed to be. They wanted to seem eternal by controlling your fate. However, the mirror showed their own frailty instead. The more they descended into evil, the clearer it became that they were not lords of destiny. They were mortals overreaching and attempting to bear a crown. Their heads were never meant to hold, and thus the collapse was unavoidable. Their God complex could not endure. The indisputable fact that they were flesh and blood, subject to the same decay laws, consequences, and finality as everyone else. Malice created the appearance of power, but death drove them to confront truth. In the end, they were not in control of your destiny. They were just another person, undone by their own conceit. Number 9, they requested a spotlight. They were unable to flee. They welcomed the attention. They were unable to flee. And there was the tipping moment, igniting everything they had created in secret for so long. They flourished in the darkness. Manipulation works best in calm situations, when no one is paying careful attention and whispers may travel quicker than facts. They relied on partial facts, gossip, and behind-the-scenes manipulation, assuming that their activities would go unnoticed while the blame rested completely on you. But as they crossed the line, they received a lot of attention. They never prepared for the eyes they used to practice on. You shifted and focused on them. It's the irony of overreach and their desire to portray you as guilty. They ended up turning the light on themselves. People who had previously disregarded their conduct could no longer do so because their escalation had become too evident, too loud, and devastating. Suddenly, they no longer had control over the tail. They were the tail. And here's why the spotlight is so awful. It does not only disclose activities. It shows the character under inspection. Every contradiction exposes every motivation, and every covert objective loses its concealment. Allies who formerly backed them begin to hesitate because no one wants to be associated with someone who is unraveling in front of the public. Their reputation, which was formerly carefully guarded, starts to erode because the light does not lie. They never imagined that attention works both ways. They wanted the audience to accept their version of events, but they forgot that once people start watching, it doesn't end with the story. It analyzes the storyteller's habits, paradoxes, and unneeded anger. Everything begins to reveal what they expected to uncover. You ultimately expose them line by line, action after action. This is why their decline seems so total. A concealed adversary may regroup, attack again, and deny. But once they entered the limelight, they summoned. There are no more hiding places. Their downfall becomes public property. The same audience that they attempted to weaponize against you now witnesses their demise. They believed they could regulate perception indefinitely. However, the light they attempted to direct at you looped back and trapped them in place. And if you're in that type of limelight, there's no way out without scars. Number 10, they pushed till their mask cracked. They pushed till the mask cracked. And then everything changed. For a time, their performance seemed convincing. A calm voice, a polished grin, and the stance of someone who cared. That mask served them as a uniform. Authority, concern, and even innocence. People trusted what they exhibited rather than what they concealed. However, masks are brittle when stretched over falsehoods. Every deceit, deliberate worry, and rehearsed emotion pushed that mask to its breaking point. All of their meticulous editing broke apart as they stopped hiding behind nuance and subtlety. The minor lapses that were before simple to overlook become hard to explain. Offhand remarks, tone changes, and poor timing began to create a pattern. The act grew less beneficial as their aggression increased. It didn't mask the rage. It exacerbated it. Their efforts to control the plot became awkward and theatrical, and many around them started to notice the disconnect between performance and personality. When the mask broke, the unveiling was public and complete. The worry that was formerly seen as empathy is now interpreted as manipulation. The authority manifested itself as entitlement. The innocence was revealed as guilt. That change is severe because it alters perceptions overnight. Allies who paid for their performance feel misled. Neutrals who previously accepted ambiguity may now identify intent. Their reputation, which had been established on appearances, crumbled as appearances could no longer be trusted. What's horrible about a damaged mosque is how quickly momentum shifts. People go from skepticism to disbelief to retreat. Those who had before leaned in to follow them take a step back. Supporters who previously needed reasons to remain now have reasons to go. The mask not only protected them, but also justified their actions. It went, and so did reason. Their words lose meaning, their judgments lose credibility, and their past power becomes a liability. The broken mosque also exposes modest personal details that indicate a broader reality. Defensiveness in explaining unexpected anger elements that were earlier considered oddities now read like confessions. And because trust is simpler to lose than to gain, each exposed vulnerability adds up soon. What they believed was a tiny crack turns out to be a succession of fractures that are so deep that full healing is doubtful. Their own escalation forced the revelation that the disguise they'd been wearing could no longer conceal the truth underneath. They wanted to be perceived one way, yet behaved another. When the mask broke, everyone saw them precisely as they were. That vulnerability didn't simply jeopardize their ambitions. It undermined their social armor, which they depended on to get away with it. They violated the unwritten pact of contention. In doing so, they disqualified themselves from being seen as anything more than irresponsible predators, much alone foes, competitors, opponents, or adversaries. Understand that some limits should not be breached. There are standards of interaction that ensure some degree of civility, if not respect. However, when your opponents intensified, they breached those invisible guardrails. They didn't just fight unfairly. They battled in ways that deprived them of legitimacy. The unwritten covenant exists because any dispute, no matter how fierce, need unrestricted equilibrium. Conflict doesn't last. It devolved into mayhem. They may have disagreed, competed, or vehemently opposed you. However, by going too far, they exceeded the tolerance of even their friends. They transformed the struggle into something worse than opposition. They made it personal, venomous, dishonorable. That type of excess does not instill terror. It promotes revulsion. When they breached those bounds, they exposed something that indicated they were not confident in their position. People who believe in their abilities do not need to violate the norms of engagement. They can win within the lines. Crossing those borders revealed that they did not believe they could beat you on an equal basis. Their desperate desire to destroy you exposed the fragility of their cause. And when an enemy demonstrates desperation, they lose the authority that comes with being a credible adversary. They underestimated the extent of the repercussions. Every exaggerated gesture had rippling effects. People who had supported them started to cringe. Observers who remained impartial recoiled. Even those who loathed you could no longer justify supporting them because the ugliness of their actions tainted the validity of their intentions. The unwritten covenant emphasizes dignity, and by abandoning it, they lost the very thing that made others trust in them. They failed to realize that conflicts are remembered not just for who won, but also for how they were fought. History does not honor the side that crosses every boundary in order to claim a phony triumph. By going too far, they branded themselves as untrustworthy and dishonorable. Their credibility did not only dwindle, it vanished. And now, even if they strive to repair their image, the memories of how they violated the pact will haunt them. They didn't just lose to you. They have lost the capacity to be taken seriously again. They walked by the point of divine intervention. They walked by the point of divine intervention. And when that barrier was crossed, everything shifted in ways that no human design could reverse. For a long period, their systems were consistent with ordinary cause and effect. Lives could be tallied, favors could be returned, and threats could be handled. However, there comes a point at which cruelty, arrogance, and continuous injustice elicit a reaction that is not motivated by politics, public relations, or power dynamics. That answer moves with timeliness, precision, and repercussions that seem bigger than human plan. When they pushed past that limit, the equilibrium they depended on broke. Their attacks evolved from personal assaults to infractions that necessitated repair at a level that individuals could feel in their bones. Small favors and inadequate explanations. The damage has no longer been fixed. Events aligned in ways that revealed their reality. Support disappeared, and unforeseen barriers emerged around the one they attempted to eliminate. It is not mystical noise. It's a realignment of reality in which moral gravity starts to reverse their velocity, and every action they thought to secure them instead returns like a natural force. The weird element for them was how little they had control over it. Allies who had previously postponed suddenly stepped aside. Evidence that had been buried rose in ways that could not be brushed over, and doors that had been closed to you opened in unexpected places. People who had no involvement in the conflict became instruments of accountability. Their suppression efforts lost efficacy since they were working against a different tide, one that reacts to purpose and moral weight rather than persuasion and coercion. This kind of intervention does not often come with fanfare. It comes in uncontrollable timing, with witnesses coming at vital periods in the unraveling of lives that were never meant to be unpicked. Their escalation transformed a private conflict into a public confrontation. The battleground has changed from human bargaining to a larger justice that eliminates the effectiveness of human defenders. Their unwillingness to respect that boundaries sprang from hubris. They thought that any lever of consequence could be managed or avoided as it crossed into the area of intervention. They were proven incorrect. Their actions were met with resistance not because of superior planning, but because the crisis had escalated beyond human control. When that occurs, their schemes fail not because of sophisticated counterattacks, but because of the plain, immovable fact that some abuses cause correction on a scale they never anticipated. As a result, they exceeded boundaries they never recognized and underestimated forces they will never forget. They created a trap that needed their own blood. They devised a trap that needed their own blood, and here is where their demise became certain. Initially, their strategies relied on borrowed resources, including your reputation, other people's gullibility, and the energy of the falsehoods they disseminated. Because they were drawing on outside sources, it cost them nothing to instill mistrust or stir up drama. However, every trap comes with a price. And when they intensified, the price required something only they could afford. Darkness is never free. It always gathers. They believed that the deception system would continue to function indefinitely via manipulation. But each stage required a greater commitment. Their credibility came first, followed by their connections, and then their peace of mind. And by the time they recognized the pattern, the trap they had created could no longer be perpetuated by external sacrifices. It began by asking for their own integrity sanity, and stability. What they intended to use to kill you started to consume you piece by piece. As a result of their demise, their plans became self-financed. Lies need upkeep. Betrayal necessitates commitment to corruption, and malice drains its bearer before it reaches its destination. They continued to feed the machine of their own annihilation, leaving only themselves as fuel. Sleep was gone. Paranoia set in, and the control they previously boasted devolved into a frenzied effort to prevent everything from falling. They're simply imprisoned with you. They were imprisoned by their own invention. The irony is that the more they engaged in causing you damage, the more life required them to demonstrate their dedication to that route. They had to give up chances, serenity, and even their own reputation to retain the appearance of dominance. The exact thing they designed to catch you becomes a noose around their own neck. Every action they believed would tighten around you really tightened around them. This is the ugly reality of malice. It doesn't simply kill its objective, it also consumes the hands that feed it by going too far. They eventually signed their own contract in blood, not literally, but in the sense that their demise became the cost of keeping the trap alive. In the end, the only person who really bought into what they created was the one who put it up. Their fall was a response to a prayer. You had never prayed, therefore your response was a prayer. You've never prayed, and that's what made it so obvious. You did not plot. You did not ask for vengeance. You didn't spend time planning how to bring them down. You bore your wounds, but you did not advocate for their punishment. The astonishing aspect is that the fall happened without you raising a finger. It did not come because you wished for their demise. It happened because their own fixation dictated the outcome. The cosmos has a certain weight that keeps itself in balance. When malice persists for an extended period of time, it falls under its own weight. They were so eager to bring you down that they unintentionally scripted the tale of their own demise. Every additional step of jealousy, every frantic effort to control, every reckless lie stacked on top of another, became a noose tightening tighter around them. What they planned for you was merely rerouted, not because you requested it, but because that is where unrestrained evil can go. This is why their failure has a distinct sting. They may claim that if you prayed, desired, or struggled for it, you engineered it. They may believe you won unjustly or pressured the result. However, they cannot. You were quiet. You were heading ahead. You were not at the epicenter of their downfall. They were their own hands. Built the building, which later collapsed on them. That is what makes it hard for them to avoid the truth. They wrote their own finale. The most sobering aspect of this tale is how justice does not always need your voice. Sometimes silence is louder than accusation. Sometimes the lack of revenge serves as a platform for divine timing to act. Your failure to pray against them is what reveals the collapse as entirely self-inflicted. Nobody can blame you since you did not ask for it. Nobody can call it vengeance since you didn't plan it. It was just a matter of cause and consequence. As a result, you did not respond to this request. It was the unavoidable outcome of their playing a game with no conclusion but devastation. That is why it hurts even more profoundly. They cannot point to you. They can only point at themselves. That is the type of retribution that no adversary can avoid. Every move your adversary made, every plot they devised, and every line they crossed became a thread in the rope that eventually ensnared them. They misinterpreted your perseverance for weakness, grew hooked to their own venom, and exposed themselves by going too far in ways they could never recover from. They gambled with time, defied the bounds of mortality, and pushed so hard that heavenly powers interfered without your knowledge. Every lie they said, every mask they wore, and every trap they set was paid for with their own demise. In the end, their preoccupation, hubris, and disdain for hidden rules were the architects of their downfall. What is amazing, and what every chosen one must realize, is that you did not have to retaliate. You didn't have to plan retribution. As a result, was not the outcome of your acts, but rather the unavoidable consequence of their own decisions. They went too far, breached boundaries, and underestimated the forces that keep the planet in balance. You just lived, persevered, and connected with the truth, while their delusions and plots became their undoing. This is the ultimate lesson. Your power is not necessarily derived from what you do. It stems from something you refuse to do, the ability to stay firm in the face of turmoil. Your adversary's fall demonstrates that the cosmos has a way of correcting itself, that obsession and brutality have a cost, and that every step they take only hasten their own demise. So rise, selected ones. Stand in peaceful confidence that your survival, integrity, and harmony with the truth are sufficient. The havoc they meant to wreak has backfired, leaving them exposed, weakened, and vanquished. Their fall is complete, and you are unharmed. Not because you battled, but because you accepted the narrative of their demise as a warning that no power, no matter how ruthless or smart, can survive the natural order when it turns against them. Your path is safeguarded. Your triumph is guaranteed. And their demise is a testament to the truth you represent. Now, pass this knowledge forward. Allow it to strengthen you. Allow it to lead you. And remember that some fights are won with a single blow. Their collapse is over. Your ascent is just starting. If this message spoke to you, make sure you don't miss what comes next. Hit the subscribe button and enable alerts to remain connected to every great insight we provide. If this video spoke to you, please express your support. Comment below with your ideas or experiences, and please share with someone who needs to hear this message today. Every click, share, and voice helps to spread the word and grow our community of chosen ones. Do not wait. Let us rise together. God bless you.